I will be very short and just recall one or two aspects also from our preparation phase. When the steering committee had decided at the end of last year that we should have at this forum one special plenary on world order and the politics of regime change, one could not have been yet aware of the dramatic and drastic consequences of regime changes in the wider region of the Middle East in particular. And it is, I think, important that we are aware, I mean, just to explain why we have such a session here, that we are aware that the policy of regime change, the doctrine underlying regime change, is antithetical to everything that the dialogical approach stands for, to dialogue between different civilizations, cultures, political systems, as well as to what was called earlier the peaceful coexistence among nations. And we should also be aware that these measures of regime change, as we see, undertaken particularly since the end of the Cold War, have had consequences, whether intended or not. Some consequences may be unintended, some may well also be intended, that have now led to situations of chaos and anarchy that cannot be contained anymore, and that now in the case of the Islamic State on the territory of Iraq and Syria, and by the way beyond, it even seems to spread towards Algeria and the Philippines, this new political reality, which is to a substantial extent the consequence of regime changes undertaken earlier in that region, seems now to require an even larger and much longer military measure, and it is a kind of new crusade-like situation where now one state after the other is pledging to contribute such and such number of fighter jets and other ammunitions and whatever. And that risks, or that may lead to a dangerous circle of, or cycle of violence from which there is no way out. And just lastly, one remark about the terminology. One is often not aware of, because regime change is now a kind of buzzword of international discourses since the collapse of the power balance of the Cold War, when Iraq, until the year 2003, had a regime until it was changed forcefully. Libya, until 2011, had a regime, and not a government, I mean, until it was changed forcefully. Syria, for the time being, still has a regime because it is not yet changed. When a regime is changed, it will neutrally be labeled the government of this and this country. So the term regime, the French, it's just the French version of the word government, has been introduced into international usage as a derogatory term, and that reveals also the ideology that is behind these measures, which are, by the way, not only military measures, but also economic measures, measures involving social engineering, involving very sophisticated operations through the use of new social media, intelligence measures, and so on. The main ideological aspect is that if a country is ruled by a regime, that means there is no rule of law. It means there are no guarantees of human rights, there is no democracy, and so on. And it also implies that there is a kind of superior institution or power or superior civilization that sets the standards, and that has decided that in a given country one has to take adequate measures. And one should not be surprised that these measures of regime change often have been just one aspect or the other side of what traditionally has been called humanitarian intervention.